Three men, three crimes, decades of appeals. As Tennessee resumes executions in 2025, some of its most infamous inmates are now facing their final countdown. But who's next, and why are their cases still drawing controversy? Before we uncover the stories of these men still awaiting execution in Tennessee, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Stay informed on the latest death row developments, true crime stories, and justice system updates. Byron Lewis Black. In the spring of 1988, the city of Nashville was shaken by a crime that would haunt Tennessee's legal system for decades. Byron Lewis Black, then a 31-year-old man with a long criminal record, brutally murdered his girlfriend, Angela Clay, and her two young daughters, 9-year-old Latoya and 6-year-old Lakeisha. The killings took place inside the family's modest apartment in North Nashville, where police would later discover a chilling crime scene that revealed the full extent of Black's violence. According to court records, the murders were committed in cold blood. Each victim had been shot multiple times, and evidence suggested the children were killed execution style after witnessing their mother's death. Prosecutors argued that the crime was premeditated and motivated by jealousy and rage. Black was arrested shortly after the murders, and in 1989 he was convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Now, over 35 years later, Byron Black remains on death row at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. His execution is scheduled for August 5, 2025, making him one of the 4 Tennessee inmates with a confirmed execution date this year. But as that date approaches, the controversy surrounding his case continues to grow, especially regarding his mental state. In recent years, Black has been diagnosed with advanced vascular dementia, a condition that impairs memory, reasoning, and the ability to understand one's surroundings. His lawyers argue that he no longer comprehends the reason for his execution, raising serious constitutional concerns. Under U.S. Supreme Court precedent, notably the 1986 Ford v. Wainwright decision, executing an individual who cannot rationally understand the punishment or its reason is considered a violation of the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. Medical evaluations submitted to Tennessee courts describe Black as delusional, disoriented, and incapable of engaging in basic conversations. Reports say he believes he's going to be transferred to another prison unit, not executed, and often fails to recognize his own lawyers or recall the crime he committed. Despite these assessments, state prosecutors maintain that Black is still legally competent, citing past behavior that suggests manipulation and strategic behavior during appeals. The legal battle over Byron Black's competency is ongoing, with last-minute motions filed in both federal and state courts. Advocates for disability rights and mental health reform have joined his defense team in urging the state to grant a stay of execution. Yet, unless courts intervene, Tennessee will move forward with the execution on schedule. If carried out, Black will be put to death by lethal injection, the standard method of execution in Tennessee, unless the inmate specifically chooses the electric chair. Under Tennessee law, inmates sentenced before 1999 have the right to choose between the two. Black, however, has made no such request, defaulting him to lethal injection under the state's updated execution protocol. The impending execution of Byron Lewis Black raises critical questions. Should a man who no longer understands reality be put to death? Does decades-long incarceration on death row justify mercy when the prisoner's mind is gone? Or does justice, no matter how delayed, still demand the ultimate price? On August 5, 2025, the state of Tennessee may provide its answer. Whether the courts will intervene remains to be seen. Until then, the debate over Byron Black's fate and his place in death penalty history continues. Donald Ray Middlebrooks. The name Donald Ray Middlebrooks has long been associated with one of the most horrifying crimes in Tennessee's modern legal history, the 1987 torture and murder of 14-year-old Carrick Majors. The crime shocked Nashville and left deep scars in a community still struggling with the painful memory of a young boy's brutal death. On the night of April 26, 1987, Carrick Majors was walking home from a friend's house in North Nashville when he was abducted by Middlebrooks and his half-brother, Harold Wayne Rollins. According to investigators and trial testimony, Carrick was held for hours, during which he was beaten, stabbed, mutilated, and ultimately killed. His body was found in an overgrown lot, bearing more than 40 injuries. The level of brutality inflicted on a defenseless teenager left prosecutors and jurors visibly shaken during the trial. Middlebrooks was arrested shortly after the crime, and in 1988, he was sentenced to death. Prosecutors argued that the murder was not only deliberate and sadistic, but also racially motivated. Carrick Majors was black, while Middlebrooks is white. The case sparked outrage and became a flashpoint for racial tensions in Tennessee at the time. The jury that sentenced Middlebrooks to death included no black jurors, despite the racial context of the crime and community protests that followed. Now, almost 4 decades later, Middlebrooks is once again at the center of controversy, this time not for what he did, but for what may have gone wrong during his prosecution. His legal team has filed a series of appeals alleging that his original trial was marred by racial bias, ineffective legal counsel, and the court's failure to adequately consider his mental illness. These appeals argue that the jury never heard crucial mitigating evidence about Middlebrooks' troubled childhood, his intellectual limitations, and psychiatric conditions that could have altered the outcome of the sentencing phase. Adding to the complexity is the fact that his accomplice, Harold Wayne Rollins, received a life sentence rather than the death penalty. This disparity, critics argue, underscores a system where sentencing can hinge more on legal representation and perception than on the facts of the crime alone. Middlebrooks' scheduled execution date was September 24, 2025, but the sentence has been officially stayed by a federal court. The stay came in response to ongoing appeals challenging the constitutionality of his conviction and the fairness of the original trial proceedings. Legal experts suggest that the appeals process could continue for years, especially given the gravity of the claims raised. If the execution had moved forward, Middlebrooks would have faced lethal injection, which remains Tennessee's default execution method unless an inmate sentenced before 1999 requests the electric chair. Middlebrooks has not opted for any alternative method. His case now joins a growing list of death penalty convictions in the U.S. Under scrutiny, not just for the severity of the crime, but for the integrity of the judicial process that followed. For the family of Carrick Majors, the pain has not faded. They've waited nearly 4 decades for closure, while legal delays and appeals continue to dominate headlines. Donald Ray Middlebrooks remains alive on death row, but whether he will ever be executed or have his sentence overturned depends on the outcome of ongoing federal court battles. In the meantime, his case continues to stir public debate over justice, fairness, and the future of capital punishment in America. Harold Wayne Nichols. Harold Wayne Nichols is one of Tennessee's longest-serving death row inmates and one of its most controversial. His crime, committed in 1988, left a community horrified and a family forever changed. Now, after nearly 4 decades of delays, Nichols is once again scheduled to face execution, this time on December 11, 2025. The crime took place in Hamilton County, Tennessee, in the early hours of a summer morning. Nichols, already known to authorities for previous sexual offenses, broke into the home of 21-year-old Karen Pulley. What followed was a brutal and senseless act of violence. Nichols sexually assaulted Karen and then beat her to death. She was found with severe head trauma and injuries consistent with a prolonged struggle. The autopsy revealed a level of brutality that shocked even seasoned investigators. Nichols was quickly identified as a suspect through forensic evidence, including fingerprints and DNA. He was arrested and charged with rape, burglary, and first-degree murder. At trial, the jury took little time in handing down a death sentence, citing the cruelty of the attack and Nichols' criminal history as aggravating factors. But while his conviction has remained intact, Nichols' execution has been postponed multiple times, not because of questions surrounding his guilt, but due to problems within Tennessee's execution system. Most notably, in 2022 and 2023, scheduled executions were halted statewide after the state's Department of Correction admitted to violating its own lethal injection protocols. A scathing independent report revealed that officials had failed to test lethal drugs properly, used expired chemicals in some cases, and allowed execution preparations to proceed with incomplete documentation. As a result, Nichols' execution, previously set for August 2020, was called off at the last minute. The state later committed to overhauling its execution procedures, pausing all executions until new safeguards were implemented. That moratorium has since been lifted, and Tennessee resumed carrying out death sentences in 2025, including the execution of Oscar Franklin Smith in May. Nichols is now next in line. His upcoming execution will be conducted by lethal injection, Tennessee's default method, unless an inmate sentenced before 1999 opts for the electric chair. Nichols has not chosen an alternative, and no public statement suggests he plans to do so. Despite the administrative delays and systemic failures that have kept him alive this long, Nichols' defense team continues to pursue last-minute appeals. These include claims that his original trial failed to fully present mitigating evidence, such as his history of childhood abuse and neurological disorders. Yet none of these appeals have succeeded in overturning the sentence. For the family of Karen Pulley, the decades-long wait has been filled with frustration and disappointment. Her parents, who have consistently attended hearings and spoken out in favor of the death penalty, have called for the sentence to be carried out so they can finally have peace. As of now, December 11, 2025, remains the scheduled execution date for Harold Wayne Nichols. If it proceeds as planned, he will become the second person executed in Tennessee under the state's revised lethal injection protocol, and one of the few to be executed after more than 35 years on death row. The case of Harold Wayne Nichols highlights not only the tragedy of one young woman's death, but also the deep flaws in the machinery of capital punishment, a system where guilt is often unquestioned, but the process is anything but swift or certain. Who was already executed in 2025? Oscar Franklin Smith. On May 22, 2025, the state of Tennessee carried out its first execution in nearly 3 years, putting to death Oscar Franklin Smith, a man whose case had lingered in the justice system for more than 3 decades. His execution marked the official resumption of capital punishment in Tennessee after a statewide pause caused by procedural failures in the lethal injection process. Smith was convicted for a triple homicide that occurred on October 1, 1989, in Nashville. His victims were his estranged wife, Judy Robert Smith, and her 2 teenage sons from a previous marriage, Jason and Chad Burnett, ages 13 and 16. The murders were particularly brutal. Judy was shot and stabbed multiple times, while both boys were shot in the head and chest at close range. The crime scene showed signs of a struggle, and investigators determined that all 3 victims were attacked in separate rooms of the home. The motive, prosecutors argued, was rooted in bitterness over a failed marriage and a custody dispute. At the time of the murders, Smith and Judy were in the midst of a divorce. Financial stress, jealousy, and fear of losing control were cited as key factors that pushed Smith to commit the murders. Despite his conviction in 1990 and a long trail of appeals that followed, Smith maintained his innocence for years. However, in the final months of his life, he chose not to contest his execution. Unlike many inmates who file last-minute motions or seek clemency, Smith declined to pursue further legal action. He was described by prison officials as quiet and resigned in the days leading up to his death. On the evening of May 22, 2025, Smith was executed by lethal injection at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. The process followed Tennessee's newly revised execution protocol, which had been updated to correct the procedural failures that halted executions in 2022. Witnesses reported that the execution proceeded without incident and that Smith did not make a final statement. His execution brought a sense of closure to some, especially the family members of the victims, who had waited over 35 years for justice. But it also reopened public debate about the death penalty in Tennessee, particularly regarding how long it takes to carry out sentences and whether such delayed justice serves the victims or the system itself. Oscar Franklin Smith's death was the first execution in Tennessee since April 2022 and the first under Governor Bill Lee's reinstated protocol. It also set the tone for what has become a renewed wave of scheduled executions in the state throughout 2025. Smith was the only Tennessee inmate executed so far this year, with three others, Byron Black, Donald Middlebrooks, and Harold Nichols, still awaiting their scheduled dates. As Tennessee moves forward with a new lethal injection protocol, the fates of Byron Black, Donald Middlebrooks, and Harold Nichols hang in the balance. With questions of competency, fairness, and justice still looming, their stories remind us that death row is never just black and white. If you found this video informative, make sure to like and share it. Subscribe for more real-time updates on executions, inmate stories, and behind-the-scenes looks at the American justice system. Drop a comment below. Do you think these executions should move forward? Or is it time to reconsider capital punishment in Tennessee? Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next true crime investigation.